The win for Canada is history for the nation.
We knew it was in the bag. Let's go!
0. For 40 years, that's the number that defined Canadian men's soccer at the World Cup. 0 wins. And then, in the second minute of stoppage time, in a stadium just outside Los Angeles, that number disappeared forever. Stephen Eustáquio controls a clearing cross on his chest, the ball drops, and in one motion he drives it past South Africa's goalkeeper. 1-0. Canada through to the round of 16. For the first time in the history of this country's men's program, a World Cup knockout match has been won. If you live in Canada, this isn't just a soccer score. It's a date you'll remember where you were when you heard it. Whether you were watching from a packed fan fest in Vancouver, a living room in Halifax, or a bar in Calgary that suddenly erupted at the same second, this is one of those rare sports moments that crosses every regional line this country usually draws. Here's what nobody's framing properly this morning. Canada has now played 8 World Cup matches across 3 tournaments, 1986, 2022, and this summer, and lost the first 6 without scoring a single goal in the first 6 combined. In 1986, 3 games, 0 goals, eliminated in the group stage. In 2022, 3 more losses, but the program's first ever World Cup goal scored by Alphonso Davies against Croatia. That's the entire history of Canadian men's soccer at this level until 11 days ago when Canada beat Qatar 6-0, their first World Cup win ever, and Jonathan David became the first host nation player to score a World Cup hat trick. Sunday's win over South Africa wasn't a standalone moment. It was the second domino in a sequence that is rewriting 4 decades of Canadian soccer history in under 2 weeks. I almost missed how close this came to not happening at all. Canada needed a result against Switzerland to stay inside the country for this knockout round. They lost 2-1, and as a result became the first ever host nation forced to play a knockout match outside its own borders. So this win didn't happen in Toronto or Vancouver in front of a sea of red. It happened in Inglewood, California, in a stadium with noticeably fewer Canadian colors in the stands than you'd expect for a home team's biggest game in history. And still, they found it. Expected goals finished 1.32 to South Africa's 0.13, 12 shots to 9 total touches inside Canada's box, despite South Africa holding 58% of possession for most of the match. The number that should make Canadians proud isn't just the final score, it's that Canada controlled the game's most dangerous moments almost entirely, even while playing what amounted to a road game in their own World Cup. Captain Alphonso Davies, the same player who scored the program's first ever World Cup goal back in 2022, came off the bench in the 75th minute. His first appearance of this tournament after recovering from injury, and the energy in the stadium visibly shifted the moment he stepped onto the pitch. Fans who'd lined up since 9 in the morning to get into Vancouver's FIFA Fan Fest, hours before kickoff on the West Coast, said the entire mood of the watch party changed the second he walked on. But here's where it gets complicated. Canada now has to win 2 more matches just to reach a semifinal. No Canadian men's team has ever sniffed in its history. And the next opponent, the winner of Monday's match between the Netherlands and Morocco, is going to be considerably tougher than South Africa, regardless of which of those 2 sides comes through. That answer is coming. But to understand exactly how Canada built a team capable of doing this in the first place, you need to see what changed behind the scenes over the last decade. And that's where this story actually gets interesting. Where we left off, Canada in the round of 16 for the first time ever on the back of a 92nd minute goal nobody saw coming until it happened, played in a Los Angeles stadium that was supposed to be neutral ground but felt for 90-plus tense minutes like the loudest classroom in the country. This is the part that kept me thinking after the final whistle. None of this is an accident. It's the output of a very specific, very deliberate set of decisions made over the better part of a decade. Go back to 2018. Canada secured co-hosting rights for the 2026 World Cup alongside the United States and Mexico, guaranteed automatic qualification, no playoff required. That single fact changed everything downstream. It meant Canada Soccer could stop building a program purely to scrape into one qualifying spot and start building one designed to actually win matches once they got there. Funding shifted toward new training centers, stadium upgrades in Vancouver and Toronto, and expanded youth tournaments. The Federation could finally plan for performance instead of survival. Then came the players. Jonathan David, Alphonso Davies, Tajon Buchanan, Sile Larin, Stephen Eustáquio, a cluster of talent playing at clubs across Europe's top leagues that Canadian soccer simply never had assembled at the same time before. Davies at Bayern Munich, David scoring at the highest level in League One and now the Premier League. Eustáquio himself spent years at Porto in Portugal's top flight before joining LAFC. This is what people mean when they say golden generation. It isn't a slogan. It's a literal roster sheet that did not exist for this country a decade ago. And then there's the coaching change. John Herdman built the emotional foundation that got Canada to Qatar in 2022. The belief that they belonged on this stage at all after a 36-year absence. Jesse Marsch, who took over after that tournament, brought something different. Tactical pragmatism. Less feel, more structure. You saw it against Qatar, a clinical 6-0 demolition. You saw it again against South Africa, 89 patient minutes of low-event football waiting for a single structural opening to appear. Whether you love his bluntness or not, look at how Marsch handled the question about Team USA after the South Africa win. A reporter asked what the Americans should watch out for against Bosnia and Herzegovina. Marsch's actual answer, "I appreciate your question, but I don't really care. It's up to the US to figure out, and they can learn from the matches Bosnia played." He wasn't dismissing the United States tournament. He was declining to hand a CONCACAF rival, one he used to coach for himself, a scouting report on an opponent Canada already has direct history with. That's not arrogance, that's a coach protecting his own program's edge, and it lands very differently depending on which side of the border you're watching from. Now here's the chain that actually matters. Automatic qualification bought Canada Soccer time and funding. That funding built infrastructure and youth pipelines. Those pipelines, combined with a generation of players already maturing in Europe's best leagues, produced a deeper, more talented squad than this country has ever fielded. And that squad, under a coach who prioritizes structure over emotion, is exactly the kind of team built to survive a scoreless, high-pressure knockout match and find one moment in stoppage time when it mattered most. But before I get to what this means for the rest of the tournament, you need to understand how rare it actually is for a team in Canada's historical position to make this kind of jump in a single tournament cycle. The real twist in this story isn't about Canada at all. It's about who they just beat and what hosting a World Cup has historically done to teams that weren't actually ready for it. Because the country on the losing end of Sunday's result has lived this exact pattern before, just from the other side of it. South Africa, the team Canada eliminated on Sunday, knows something about this better than almost anyone. Back in 2010, South Africa hosted its own World Cup and became the first host nation in tournament history to fail to escape the group stage. Hosting bought them a stage. It didn't buy them a team. 16 years later, the same federation is still chasing the kind of knockout breakthrough Canada just achieved, except this time Canada was the one standing in their way. That contrast is really the whole story of co-hosting in 2026. Automatic qualification is a gift, but it's only useful if a federation spends the years before the tournament actually building a roster capable of using it. Mexico, the third co-host, has a long history of reaching the knockout rounds and knows exactly how to convert a home tournament into results. Canada had never done this before in its history. The fact that they've now done it on their first real attempt with players who weren't even teenagers when this co-hosting bid was secured back in 2018 says something specific about how that decade of investment actually paid off, rather than producing another group stage exit like South Africa's in 2010. Now, I want to be fair here because it's easy to get carried away with one good knockout win. The United States, the third team in this North American trio, has a roster that includes Christian Pulisic and a generation of its own that's been building for years. They drew Canada 1-1 in the group stage earlier this tournament, a result Canada was actually expected to win, not the USE, and the Americans head into their own round of 32 match against Bosnia and Herzegovina with real depth and real expectations of their own. Marsch declining to hand them a scouting report doesn't mean the U.S. team is in trouble. It means a CONCACAF rival who's already faced Bosnia isn't doing them any favors. That's a normal competitive instinct between programs that have shared coaches and rivalries for years. not a sign that one is collapsing while the other rises. This is the part that caught me off guard when I actually laid the numbers side by side. Canada is now into the knockout rounds while playing a road game in its own World Cup after losing the one group match that would have kept them home. South Africa, despite a 58% possession share on Sunday, managed just 9 total touches inside Canada's box. Possession without penetration is exactly the trap that eliminated South Africa in 2010, too. Plenty of the ball, not enough done with it in the moments that count. So what does this mean for Canada specifically? It means the structural advantage of co-hosting only became real because of choices made over the better part of a decade: funding, player development, coaching philosophy. Hosting alone has eliminated teams before. It rewarded Canada this time, but only because the groundwork was already there when the moment finally arrived. If that's the pattern, investment plus timing plus one clutch moment, then the obvious next question is what happens when Canada runs into a team with even more of all three? Because that team, either Netherlands or Morocco, is coming to Houston either way, and neither one has Canada's history of falling short on this exact stage. 0 wins for 40 years. Now, one historic knockout win, a nation's biggest soccer moment in its history, and a date with the winner of Netherlands versus Morocco in Houston on July 4th. That's exactly where this stands as of right now, and it's worth sitting with how fast that sentence would have sounded impossible just 2 tournaments ago. I keep coming back to one image from Sunday night: Jesse Marsch on the pitch after the final whistle, telling his own players they were Canadian heroes before he'd even spoken to a single reporter. Whatever you think of his bluntness with the media afterward, that instinct, message the team first, deal with the cameras second, tells you something about why this group has bought into his approach so completely. Let's get concrete about what comes next, because the road from here only gets harder. The round of 16 in Houston is a single elimination match against a team that's either Dutch, a side with deep tournament pedigree and multiple World Cup final appearances, or Moroccan, the program that reached the semi-final in 2022 and eliminated Canada in their final group match that same tournament. Either opponent arrives with more World Cup knockout experience than Canada's entire program had collectively before this past Sunday. The expected goals gap that favored Canada against South Africa, 1.32 to 0.13, is unlikely to be that lopsided again. If Canada wants to advance to a quarterfinal, a stage no Canadian men's team has ever reached, they will need more than one moment of stoppage time magic. They'll need the same defensive composure they showed against South Africa, but against opponents who create far more danger in the final third. There's also a broader, less visible shift happening here that matters beyond this single tournament. Fan interest in the men's national team has grown sharply since the 2022 qualification run ended a 36-year World Cup drought, and hosting matches across Vancouver and Toronto, followed by this knockout run, has pushed soccer further into the mainstream conversation in a country that has always organized its sporting identity around hockey first. The training centers and stadium upgrades tied to the 2026 hosting bid don't disappear when this tournament ends in July. They become the foundation for whichever generation comes after Davies, David, and Eustáquio. Win or lose in Houston, that part of the legacy is already locked in. As for the U.S. side of this story, Marsch's old program, the team he once coached for, their own tournament is just getting started in earnest, and their result against Bosnia and Herzegovina will say a lot about whether this genuinely becomes the breakthrough World Cup for North American soccer as a region, not just for one country inside it. Canadians have every right to enjoy this moment fully without needing the Americans to fail for it to mean something. But if you're asking me what Sunday actually proved, here it is in one sentence: a federation that spent a decade building patiently under a coach who values structure over sentiment just turned a single moment into the most significant 90 minutes in the history of Canadian men's soccer. So here's my question for you, knowing everything Canada already had to overcome just to get here. Do you think this team has one more historic moment left in Houston, or was Sunday already the high point of this tournament for Canada? I'd genuinely like to know what you think.